Bob, I'm going to give you a new setting to find. See, most of the people are on this side, so it doesn't really make sense for me to be way over in the middle when I do the service part. So I think here looks good. Bob, can you find me? Where's Waldo? Where's Cantor? So Bob, I'm going to lead the service. After I do Havdalah, I'm going to lead the service from here. Okay? So if you want to do a tighter shot for here, again with the slides, that might be good. I might have turned you off, so I can't hear you, but okay, I'll actually leave this here so that you can kind of work on that. I think we're going to start in 3 or 4 minutes. So I might start with a nigun pretty soon, but I think it just makes more sense to lead the service part from here. So I'm just going to leave this here, and it'll be set. Maybe I'll stay here for a moment in case they want to set something. Judy Lerner says she has a picture and no sound. That's probably because she's on the website and there's no sound yet or something. Would that be right, Bob? Well, Judy Lerner is probably watching on the website or something, and she says that she has no sound. But it may not have kicked in yet. I don't know. Anyways, I'm going to go into the mode as if we're doing this as opposed to talking about it. So, Bob, I think I'm going to turn off the Zoom sound, so I won't be able to hear you anymore. But I'm going to go into position right by the Havdalah set right now. All right, Susan says sound is fine on Zoom. So, ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la, ya la la la, ya la la, ya la la, ya la la la. We don't need the slides till we start the service, so you can take them off of the screen. Ya la la, ya la la, ya la la, ya la la, ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la la, ya la la la, ya la la, ya la la, ya la 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 la. Shabbat Shalom. In a moment we'll be saying Shavua Tov, as we're going to be ending Shabbat a little bit early so that we can start our Tisha B'Av service. It still is a little bit light out. Try and picture that the sun is setting. Let's say that it almost has already set. And the darkness that is enfolding or engulfing us is a premonition of this day that we're about to experience, of this darkness of Tisha B'Av. So we begin with Havdalah, which you can. What did God do as God created the world from nothing? What did God do first? God said, "Let there be light." God didn't even just spoke, and there was light. And so we, though, have to create light physically as opposed to just saying it. And so we begin with the blessings for Havdalah. Ya la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la la, ya la la, ya la la. Ya la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la, ya la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen. Ya la ya la 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 la, ya la ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la ya la la, ya ya la 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 la, ya la ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la ya la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim borei minei v'samim. Yalai la 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 la. Somebody want to come in? Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la ya la la. Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la ya la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei haesh borei meorei haesh. Ya ya la 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 la. Ya la ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la ya la la, ya ya la 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 la, ya la ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la ya la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la ya la la ya la la. Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la la la. Ya la la ya la la ya la la. Ya 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 la 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 la. Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la la la. Ya la la. Ya la la. Ya la la. Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la ya la 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 la. Ya la la la. Ya la la. Ya la la. Ya la la. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimhera veyamenu, Yavo elenu. Im Mashiach ben David, Im Mashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol, Chatotenu hu yimechom, Zarenu v'chaspenu, Yarbekecho, V'hakochavim. I think I put too much stir now. Have to wait for this to burn out. It might be dark by the time it does. Ya ya la la la, ya ya la la la, ya la la, ya la la la, ya ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la la, ya la la, ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la la, ya la la la, ya la la, ya la la, ya la la, ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la. Shavua tov, 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 Shavua tov. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. We're going to begin our service in just a moment, our Mariv, our evening service, in the Siddur. They have a pamphlet as well, and you'll be able to find the words in the Siddur, but also on the screen in front of you as well at this point. We begin in a moment with the Baruch Hu. As we do the service, you'll notice it's the same as other weekday services. However, the melodies and the nusach, the formulation of how we chant the service, changes dramatically, especially for this day, for the Mariv service of Erev Tisha B'Av. It's very plaintive. You'll hear it in a minor mode, and it's a descending minor mode, and you'll hear that throughout, not only in the nusach, the formulation of the prayers right now, but eventually as well in the book of Echav, Lamentations, when we read that as well. So we begin our evening, our Mariv service on page 4. And if you're able, I ask you to rise at this time. And you can put Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach, Baruch Adonai Mevorach Leolam, Baruch Adonai Mevorach Leolam Va'ed. You may be seated as we continue on page 6. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro mariv aravim bechokma poteach she'arim ubidvuna mishana itim ומחליף את הזמנים, ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו ברי יום ולילה גולל אור מבני חושך וחושך מבני אור. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו. אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ערבים. אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכבנו וקומנו, נשיח בחוקך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה. ואהבתך תשים ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שיבוא מלכותו לעולם ועד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. On page 15, we'll read responsively. In a world torn by violence and pain, a world far from wholeness and peace, give us the courage to say, Adonai, there is one God in heaven and earth. From bondage in Egypt we were delivered. At Sinai we bound ourselves to your way. Inspired by prophets and instructed by sages, time and again we overcame oppressive forces. Though our failings are many and our faults are great, it has been our glory to bear witness to our God, keeping alive in dark ages your vision of a world redeemed. Let us continue to work for the day when the nations will be one and at peace. Then shall we rejoice as Israel did, singing on the shores of the sea. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh norati lot, osef el norati lot, osef el malchutecha ra'u vanecha, bokei hayam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, Zeli hanu ve'amru Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מעיר חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים שלום יטבי עד עולם. Baruch atah Adonai, Shomer Amo Yisrael la'ad. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel. As we continue with the Chatzi Kaddish. Yitkada v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yamad yivrak yirutei v'yamalik machutei, v'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayed v'chol Beit Yisrael, Karev imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam yomei hamaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shmei l'kudesha brichu le'ela mikol bechata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran b'yama v'imru amen. Those who are able, we rise for the tefillah, which you can find on page 74. We'll do the first part of this together, and then we'll continue silently in the Hebrew. And for those of you who are on Zoom or on the screen, once we get through the first three parts and we continue silently, the screen, the slides will change every 5 to 10 seconds, so you'll be able to follow along in the silent part of the tefillah. Adonai sefatai tiftachu fi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai sefatai tiftachu fi yagi tehilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gohomer Chasadim Tovim Mikonei Hakol וזוכר חסדי אבות ואמהות ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ויעזרת שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחיה מתים אתה רב להושיע מוריד הטל מחכה לחיים בחסד מחיה מתים ברחמים רבים סומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני מחיה המתים אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. We continue silently through Oseh Shalom. Again, if you have the Siddur on the either facing page and with the slides, every 5 or 10 seconds you'll see it will change. And when you are finished, you may be seated. Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Yaseh shalom bimromav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Take the slides off for a moment, then we'll come back to them. We're going to be transitioning from the Siddur that we are using in the sanctuary to the pamphlet that we'll be using in just a moment, and that will also be the next series of slides that we'll see on the screen in a couple of moments. But before we get there, as this is a Tisha B'Av service, you've seen that the melodies have changed. They're very plaintive. To reflect the mood of this commemoration of this day, commemorating the destruction of the temples, commemorating perhaps the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, and other calamities that have befallen the Jewish people. But also it's a day to reflect as one of the low points of the year, as we have kind of been heading towards this most immediately from the 3 days prior to today. Shvas Ar B'Tammuz, as the outer temple, the walls were breached of the temple, of the city, and then eventually the temple was destroyed on Tisha B'Av, on this day that we've just entered into today. But we find even with all this calamity and this destruction, it's also time to reflect on what's happening in our world as well, and the things that have befallen us in the last couple of months, or even the year, a couple of years with the pandemic, the woes, the trials, the tribulations that we've had as well. But the Jewish people are a people of hope. And so even as we finish and we discuss and we talk about different elements and themes today, as we end with a yearning that things can be better. And then we enter a period of 7 weeks where we've had haftarot of despair and of destruction, going into these weeks of comfort and reconciliation and hope as we head from now, 7 weeks later, that will then be the high holy days. For some, that might be a little bit of fear as well, that they're only 7 weeks away, but that is where we will be heading. So we're kind of entering this low point, and then from there we move up, up, and up to the high holy days. So we are going to be entering into this, into the depths of Tisha B'Av, if you will, right now, reading from Lamentations. And you can hear from the title, it's all about lamenting what has happened, the terrible things that have befallen us. One of the consequences of leaving and losing the temple is that we went into exile, and we had to go into the diaspora. And we're in the diaspora right now. Some of us who are in Israel have a chance to visit. We're so fortunate that we have a homeland and that we can go and visit. For 2,000 years, we really didn't, but we're in a period in history where we do. So it's such a fortunate thing to be able to go to the Promised Land, to the Holy Land. And if you haven't, I encourage you to go during this unique point in history. But we are we're in exile. We're going into exile. So we will also make a change in our sanctuary as well. Those who feel comfortable, you may stay in your seats, but if you want, as we kind of move into this area over here where there are some chairs, especially those who are participating in the service, I encourage you, the next part of the service, to sit in the chairs or sit on the ground. As part of the practice is that we make ourselves, it's in a sense a period of mourning. And we sit on not quite as comfortable chairs or on the ground. And that's what we do in morning practices as well. We'll be chanting different verses from Megillat Eicha, which is Lamentations. There are 5 chapters that are alphabetical acrostic. As I explained last night, it's kind of like from A to Z, all the calamities that have befallen us, or from Aleph to Taf. We'll do the first part of some of the chapters. Sometimes we'll chant it in Hebrew. Sometimes we'll chant it in English. One of the chapters we'll chant in Yiddish, again reflecting the diversity of having to go into the exile and have these other languages as well. between these verses or chapters, we will sing some songs, appropriate songs by the Water of Babylon, Eli Eli, Hashivenu, and we'll also hear from poets in our midst, if you will, people who have written to express what we are all feeling or what we may be feeling during this day. We'll have a chance to hear from some of our congregants, our poets, in between the chapters as well. So as we continue now with the slides, and we turn to page 2 in our pamphlet, we'll sing Avinu Malkeinu Anal Neharot Bavel as we, if you choose, especially those who are participating, please come and sit in the seats in the front. And if you'd like to come a little closer, so in a sense we form a little closer group here, you may do that as well. Avinu Malkeinu Chonenu Vanenu Avinu Malkeinu Chonenu Vanenu Ki en banu masim Haseh imanu Tzedaka v'chesed Haseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed v'hoshienu Avinu Malkeinu. You guys can kind of use this one. Chonenu vanenu Avinu Malkeinu Chonenu vanenu Ki en banu masi Aseh imanu Tzedaka v'chesed Aseh imanu Tzedaka v'chesed V'hoshienu Al naharot Bavel Al naharot Bavel Sham yashavnu Kam bachinu Bezochrenu et Zion Bezochrenu et Zion Al naharot Bavel Al naharot Bavel Sham yashavnu Kam bachinu Bezochrenu et Zion Bezochrenu et Zion. As we turn here to the third page, I invite Cantor Berkowitz to chant the first 3 verses of chapter 1 of Eicha in the Hebrew. It's on some of the slides in front of you.
Eicha yashefa vadad ha'ir rabati am hayeta ke'almana rabati vagoyim sarati bamdinot hayeta lamas bacho tivke palailani umerov avada hi yashev avagoyim lo matzah manoach kol rodfeha hisiguha ben hamitzarim.
Shekach, as we continue on page 4 with this poem that Sherry Blumberg wrote. And that's for Sherry. You can use that microphone to read this poem, pages 4 and 5.
Out of Babylon. From out of Babylon we come. Don't look back. We have enough salt statues in our past. So many have died. So many will limp out. A few who will return whole. Oh, the walk back is hard. We will come into our old new land among the grave stones, and all of us wondering, pondering, shouting out, will my family, my community be whole? To our current or new Jerusalem we come. We seek old new friends among the lucky, the vaccinated, and many of us will be seeking, inquiring, returning, many of us wanting home. What will we find? Where will we find it? What was lost and what was learned? We return or move on this day of remembering the good and the heroes, the losses and the stumbling blocks, our history and our generation's plague, the temple, our home. From out of isolation we come, looking into old new faces, granting us healing and rejoicing among our old new tzibur. We sought courage and discernment this year. Dear God, bring us home.
By the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. By the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. So continue with the next 3 verses of chapter 2 on page 7 or before you. This time we'll chant them in the English. Alas, the Eternal has covered with a cloud the daughter of Zion in God's anger. God has cast down from heaven unto earth the splendor of Israel. God has not remembered God's footstool in the day of God's anger. Brought waste without pity by the Eternal are all of Jacob's habitations. God has thrown down in God's wrath the stronghold of the daughters of Judah. God has brought them down to the ground. God has polluted the kingdom and its princes. Cut off by God in fierce anger is all the horn of Israel. God has withdrawn God's right hand in the presence of the foe. God has burned in Jacob like a flaming fire, which consumes everything. So we now turn to DeWitt for his poem.
This is the 18th poem in a series of reflective poems about walking through Auschwitz through the lens of the classical Chinese poem, the Tao Te Ching. In the world to come, make it rain, make it snow, make it sleet, make the heat rise up. Let the evening cool the ground, let the grasses grow, let the wildflowers grow. Let the bones remain beneath all this, let the rains come, pouring rains, howling rains, sweet rains. Let the snow pile up against the stones, let the snow sink deep into the ground, let the dew cleanse each summer day, let the sun bake the place, let the moon and the stars make evening light of the place. Let the ice thicken all that was here. Let the icicles drip from every roof. Make the sky darken. Make the sky brighten. Let the living start to come back. Let it be a place of memory, a place where some had hoped we'd all rise and float away from this place. Ashes rising from this place. Ashes circling over all, over everyone, over everything. Circling, a constant circling, a ring forever circling, a constant ringing. Shema Israel.
Thank you. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol v'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat hadam, hachol v'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat hadam. Oh God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart. As we now enter into chapter 3, this chapter, all the other chapters are an alphabetical acrostic of 22 verses, Aleph through Taf. And this one is an alphabetical acrostic of 66 verses. It's a triple acrostic, Aleph, 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 Bet, 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 Gimel, 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 and so on. Well, again, we'll be reading the first part of it, but you'll notice the form is a little bit different with these this triple acrostic. And the melody is quite different as well. And we incorporate a Western European tune, nusach, and then an Eastern European nusach. Ani hagevera oni b'shevet evrato oti nahag vayola choshech velor achbi yashu yafoch yado Kol hayom bila v'sari ve'ori shibar atzmotai banalai v'yakaf rosh utla b'machashakim hoshivani kemetei olam. Gadar badi velo etze hichbid nechashti gam ki ezak va'ashaveya satam tefilati gadar derachai begazit Netzivotai Iva. As we continue now with the next poem, this poem by Norm Mailman.
Innocence, innocence, wherefore art thou, O innocence? An ode to the songs of my youth and the toll of violence. Ages 0 through 20 were all fun and games, or to quote a stock market cliche, away in May and go and play. By 1965, the war in Vietnam was becoming more and more of a political issue that started to involve former high school classmates and, for the first time, members of my pharmacy school class. Barry McGuire released "We're on the Eve of Destruction," and the lyrics seared through me like napalm on the skin of innocent victims. In 1966, I was 21, and Cher and Nancy Sinatra released versions of a song called "Bang Bang, My Baby Shot Me Down." Gone were the soapy pop tunes of my childhood, but I retained an outlook of optimism as conflicts took place in distant lands and involved others. I graduated pharmacy school in 1969, and in 1970, the Armstrong brothers and David Fine and Leo Burt bombed Sterling Hall, which shared a wall with the home of my pharmacy education. It was a form of war protest. Violence begets violence. Where have all the flowers gone? Hello, darkness, my old friend, sang Simon and Garfunkel, and indeed the world I knew seemed to be growing ever darker and torn by battle. Still, much of it took place in a distant lands and could with effort be ignored. Iraq, Iran, Afghan, Sudan, Yemen, West Bank, Left Bank, Ukraine, deaths in vain. When will it ever end? When will it end? 10 years ago this August, a gunman opened fire at the Sikh temple in Oak Creek. Mass violence had now done its damage in our country, in our state, in our city, and for some in this congregation, in our neighborhood. It did not stop there or then. The victims of the Sikh shooting and countless others that followed are indeed gone to graveyards, everyone. We can neither ignore the violence nor dwell in misery. In the works of the last line of Ardas, a daily Sikh prayer, in God's name we shall be relentlessly optimistic because you want peace and prosperity for all people. In the words of one of the great poets of our time, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Let us hear the answer and be refreshed by the breeze of peace, for he or she who fails to learn from history is doomed to make the same mistakes in the future.
Thank you, Norm. As we continue with Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom bimroma, huyaseh Shalom aleinu yako Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh Shalom bimroma, huyaseh Shalom aleinu ve'ako Yisrael ve'imru amen. And now as we approach, we enter into chapter 4. We will read the first 7 verses. Perhaps chant them, we'll read them in Yiddish, and we ask Cantor Berkowitz to please give us these verses in Yiddish.
This verdunkelt das Gold, verbitten das teure Feingold, die heilige Steine zerschotten in alle Eckgassen, die teure Kinder von Zion mit Gingol geweugen. wie seinen See gerechnet verlimmene Kriege gemachet von Taperes Hand a viele Schakalen sind euch die Brust gewähne Zeugen sehr junge, die Tochter mein Volk ist an Achser geworden. Also wie Streus Feigelen in der Midbar, die Zunge von dem Säugedicken ist Zeuge kalbet. Zu sein Gummen von der Steckheit. Kleine Kinder betten Brust und keiner brechet sie nicht ab. Die was pflegen essen teure Speisen seinen wisst ist die Gassen, die der Zeugen in Vermil reut, tollein sich so Miste häufend. Warum die Zinn von der Tochter mein Volk ist größer wie der Heid von Stom, was ist übergekehrt geworden wie in Erev. Und ein zumal seinen nicht gefallen auf ihre Früchten seinen gewohnen Leiter von Schnee, weißer von Milch, gereut Letter Eufen Leib von Karalen, Zapierstein, sehr geschät alt.
So we continue now with this next poem written by Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt entitled Since. And Audrey, if you would read that for us.
Since the election, since Nazis marched in Charlottesville, since the pandemic started and we ran out of PPE, and that guy suggested drinking bleach, since facts became debatable, like how viruses work and whether science is real, since Kentucky flooded, since the tarmac at Heathrow melted from extreme heat, since monkeypox and sly insinuations, since don't say gay, and teachers hiding who they are, and students hiding under desks, since I lost track of school shootings. Since that time, they said, it doesn't matter if we lose, we'll just claim victory, and then did. Since smashed windows in the Capitol, since Confederate flags, since democracy buckled, since I realized democracy had been buckling for a long time, since misinformation, since SCOTUS erased rights, since fear-mongering about groomers, about critical race theory, since the latest flyer blaming everything on hook-nosed yarmulke wearers, since I realized how much they hate us, since it became unsafe to be, since I realized it's never been safe.
Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ve'emunah shema, beviat HaMashiach, beviat HaMashiach ani ma'amin, ve'af al pi she'yitmamea, im kol ze ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, be'emunah shelema, beviat HaMashiach, beviat HaMashiach ani ma'amin, ve'af al pi she'yitmamea, im kol ze ani ma'amin. As we read in chapter 5 of Echa, these are the last 4 or 5 verses, and we will chant them. I'll chant first in the Hebrew with Sherry Blumberg to my left here chanting then in the English, verse by verse. Ata Adonai leolam teshev, kisacha ledor vador.
O eternal, you remain forever. Your throne is from generation to generation.
Lama lanetzach tishkachenu, tazvenu leorech yamim.
Why will you forget us forever and forsake us for so long a time?
Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yamenu kekedem.
Turn us unto you, O eternal, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old.
Ki ma'os me'astanu katzafta alenu ad me'od.
Can you have rejected us so utterly? Can you be so greatly angry with us?
Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yamenu
renew our days as of old.
And this last verse, or second to last verse, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh Yameinu kekedem. Turn us unto you, O eternal, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old. This is also the last verse, or the last words that we utter as we put the Torah away back in the ark, as we hope also for a better time. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, v'nashuva, v'nashuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yamenu kekedem. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, v'nashuva, v'nashuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yamenu kekedem. Chadesh, Chadesh, Yamenu kekedem. As we continue on the next slide, we actually are going to go to the last page in our pamphlet, which you'll find Elit Zion. You turn to the very last page. And we have sung, this is a very famous dirge, one of the keynote, as it says here, of Tisha B'Av, the famous liturgical poems of Tisha B'Av. It was originally written in an acrostic. And here we have the letters of Gimel and Daled, which you can see in the verse, Ale Galut and Ve'al Damam. But this particular tune, or this particular poem, has a tune with it that we have sung through many different iterations. We sang it for Micha Mocha. Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai. We sang it for Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom Bimromav. We sing it in the 3 weeks between Shvas Arba Tammuz and between Tisha B'Av for Lecha Dodi. During these 3 weeks on Shabbat. Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala. And so it's a very famous tune associated with this moment, this commemoration of Tisha B'Av. And here it is in the original Elit Zion. Wail, O Zion, with your cities like a woman in bitter anguish, like a maiden girt in sackcloth for the husband of her youth. Elit Zion ve'areha kemo isha v'tzireha v'chiftu la chaguratzak al bal neureha ale galut meshartel mani meshir zemareha ve'al damam asher shupach kemo memeye oreha Elit Zion ve'areha kemo isha v'tzireha v'chiftu la chaguratzak al bal neureha. As we turn back to Aleinu, those who are able, it's on page 21. As we continue forward in the slides, we continue on page 21 with Aleinu. Those who are able, we rise. Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon hakol, latei gedula liyotzeh b'reishit, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. Let the time not be distant, O God, when all shall turn to you in love, when corruption and evil shall give way to integrity and goodness, when superstition shall no longer enslave the mind, nor idolatry blind the eye. O may all created in your image become one in spirit and one in friendship, forever united in your service. Then shall your realm be established on earth, and the word of your prophet fulfilled. The eternal will reign forever and ever. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. As we, as a congregation, as a community, now continue with the words of Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, B'yamad yivrach hiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayeh v'chol beit Yisrael, ba'gala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam le'omei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei kudusha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran b'yalma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who makes peace in the high heavens above send peace down here to us, to all of Israel, to all who mourn, to all who remember on this day. And let us say, Amen. Amen. Please be seated for a moment. Before we conclude our service, I would like to thank our poets and readers, to Sherry Blumberg, DeWitt Clinton, Norm Malman, and Audrey Berman, to our chanters, those who helped with the chanting, to Cantor Jerry Berkowitz and to Sherry Blumberg, to Bob Brasner and Amalia Steinberg up in the control room for making the service possible so that we can see it here and that you can see it online on the different platforms. And to all of you who have come to participate and to remember on this day, both here in the sanctuary and also those of you who are online participating and observing Tisha B'Av with us here. So thank you for participating, and we're going to end our service with Beyado on page 30, on page 30. Beyado avkidruchi be'et ishan ve'yaira ve'imruchi geviati Adonai li velo ira ve'imruchi geviati Adonai li velo ira. My soul I give to you, my spirit in your care. Draw me near, I shall not fear. Hold me in your hand, draw me near, I shall not fear, safely in your hand. Beyado afkiruchi, be'edishan ve'yaira, ve'imruchi geviati, Adonai li velo ira, ve'imruchi geviati, Adonai li velo ira. To those who are fasting during this day, I wish you a tzom kal, an easy fast, a light fast, and may you go in peace as you leave the sanctuary. Shavua Tov.